Hello, I'm Hazem Seeker. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. After a week of NAFTA talks, we'll look at the impact Trump's approach is having on world trade. Also this week, how high can they go? Argentina has the steepest interest rates in the world after raising them to a record 60%. Why social media celebrities, vloggers, and Instagram personalities may be forced to come clean about their product endorsements. So it's been a tense week of haggling for Mexico, the United States, and Canada. The 24-year-old North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement was designed as a three-way deal. So the US and Mexico surprised everyone when they reached a bilateral agreement first. Mexico's president-elect takes office in December, and so the Mexicans really want a free trade deal before then. The message to Canada: join in or face auto tariffs. It all amounted to a pressure cooker atmosphere. It's worth bearing in mind that any deal will still need the approval of legislators in all three countries. Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland went to Washington to try to repair the damage. Asked if a deal could be reached, she said this.
You're tempting me to say something Churchillian. Is it the end of the beginning of the end? Look, let me just say, a lot has been accomplished.
Simon Evenett joins me now from St Gallen University in Switzerland. He oversees the MBA program there and is a professor of international trade and economic development. Thanks very much for being with us. So, does this updated NAFTA have the kind of support that it needs from the business community and the general public right now?
The updated NAFTA agreement, especially the US-Mexican deal, will be supported by business really for almost the relief it gives, because the uncertainty was killing investment plans. As for public support for this, I expect it will be much greater in the steel sector and in the car sector and in the states in the United States where those industries are well represented, like Michigan.
So what was at stake there then between those industries that you're talking about, particularly between the relationship they have between the US and Mexico? And is it really that different from the current NAFTA deal? Well,
you've asked two things. So let me answer the second one first. The new NAFTA deal is actually a very small modification of the old NAFTA deal. It's been dressed up to look like it's a big deal for political reasons. And this is one of the reasons why I think the business community will be so relieved to see that there won't be too much disruption to their supply chains. There's enough meat in here which has been given to the trade unions, however, that they will be supportive of this particular deal when it goes before Congress.
And what about the negotiating tactics of President Trump then, particularly the pressure that he's been putting on Canada this week to reach a deal this week? What do you make of that? What effect is it having?
So the negotiating tactics of the Trump administration is a classic power play. They've essentially divided Canada and Mexico. Mexico needed to have a deal quickly before their current president leaves office, and that requires signature by the end of this week. And this deal was done with the Canadians outside of the room. And of course, once the deal was done with Mexico, Canada desperately wants to retain its membership of NAFTA, and so will come under enormous pressure this week to make concessions to the Americans, probably in the areas of dairy products and investment disputes.
And President Trump generally prefers bilateral deals rather than multilateral deals, and he certainly likes to tweet about it publicly. What can we learn from all of that this week?
I think we learned that, in this sense, he is true to his word, that the president doesn't like negotiating with big groups or even small groups of countries. He wants to deal with each country one by one. It should be said, however, that the deal he's doing with Mexico, and he will probably do with Canada, is a bit like the renegotiation of the Korean trade agreement. And that was, these are deals which have been reworked and ultimately to the advantage of the United States. But there are no more such renegotiations planned that the United States has. So I think in terms of the broader implications going forward, this NAFTA negotiation is rather special. It's the last in the renegotiations that he wanted to undertake. I think the much bigger questions will turn to how he treats China and automobile imports in general in the months ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, can we measure at this stage what impact all of this is going to have on global trade?
The impact of a reworked NAFTA deal is going to be absolutely trivial for global trade. There will be some Mexican firms who will want to source more parts and components from North America and less from Latin America and from China, but this will be relatively small. I think the big factor is that as more and more evidence builds that Trump's bark is worse than his bite on trade, then business uncertainty and fears about a trade war will subside, and this will help bolster investment and trade flows. So I think the main mechanism is actually through reducing fear of the business community that the world trading system could be seriously disrupted by any of Trump's tactics, mainly because he is just not converting his harsh tweets into severe sanctions, other than for China, who is feeling the brunt of his particular pressure at the moment.
So what's all this going to mean then for consumers? Is it going to mean higher prices for some goods for them, particularly cars? You mentioned cars earlier.
There will be a slight increases in the costs of cars produced in the North American region, probably greater increases in costs in Mexico than in the United States. Some of that will be passed on to consumers, probably in the small end cars, which have much smaller profit margins. Larger cars have much larger profit margins, and the firms can absorb some of the costs there.
Simon Evenett, good to speak with you. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
US President Donald Trump Googled himself this week, and he didn't like what came up. Without any evidence, he accused Google of giving prominence to news articles that are negative about him. He's vowed to address the situation. Our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett has more.
Yeah, I think Google is really taking advantage of a lot of people. And I think
allegations from U.S. President Donald Trump that tech giants like Google and Facebook are silencing conservative opinions.
We have literally thousands and thousands of complaints coming in, and you just can't do that. So I think that Google and Twitter and Facebook, they're really treading on very, very troubled territory, and they have to be careful. It's not fair to large portions of the population.
Trump's comments follow a Tuesday morning tweet where Trump claimed he Googled the search term Trump News with negative results. He says online searches are rigged by liberal-owned media groups to shadow ban or silence conservative viewpoints. That's why Trump economic advisor Larry Kudlow says the administration isn't ruling out action, even regulation.
We'll let you know. We're taking a look at it.
In a statement, Google denies its searches are selective. It says that when a user types a query into the Google search bar, its goal is to make sure they receive the most relevant answers in a matter of seconds. Search is not used to set a political agenda. We don't bias our results toward any political ideology.
He's not accurate.
This tech industry analyst says Trump's allegation that tech giants are systematically biased against conservatives is nothing new.
If Trump is Google searching himself and finding that a lot of people don't like him, that's because a lot of people don't like him. Now, to be clear, that would also have been true if Barack Obama had Googled himself.
But conservatives in the U.S. are pushing back.
It's basically an intergalactic invasion into this space through people.
They point to the recent removal of controversial right-wing radio host Alex Jones from Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. Private tech companies say they're legally within their rights to ban offensive content. Critics say they're silencing dissent. Some Republican members of Congress are even arguing today's big tech companies are monopolies in the marketplace and should be regulated to foster political debate from all sides, a move the White House now appears to be considering.
All right, still to come on Counting the Cost.
I'm Florence Louis in Sabah State, Malaysia, where the demand for land development and biofuel is threatening not just forests, but a way of life.
But first, Argentina's currency continues to fall despite central bank raising the key interest rate to 60%, the highest in the world. Labor unions are planning walkouts, and students have been on the streets over university cuts. Paul Chadurjan reports.
The downpour from turbulent economic storms over Argentina couldn't stop these university students on Thursday night. The The students, along with their professors, braved the rain to march through Buenos Aires and express their outrage over budget cuts in education.
I'm here to defend free and high-quality public education.
Salaries don't match the rate of inflation.
On top of a lower university budget, the country is in a crisis because of the International Monetary Fund.
The International Monetary Fund has extended a $50 billion bailout loan to Argentina. When President Mauricio Macri asked for an early release of the IMF funds, the peso tumbled to a new low against the dollar, ending the day at nearly half the value it had on January the 1st.
With the dollar worth over 40 pesos, we cannot buy teaching material, supplies, or tools.
Inflation is exceeding 30%, and we are earning less than we need to feed ourselves. There are teachers who are living in poverty.
Protesters say basic needs get more expensive every day. Utility rates have increased 1,500%, and businesses are closing, leaving more people jobless. They blame President Macri for what they call an economic disaster. Economists say the government needs to stop foreign currency from leaving the country.
However, the government has done the exact opposite. They've totally deregulated markets, sort of setting the grounds for this run on the dollar.
President Macri is trying to ease panic among investors. He has promised to restore economic growth while cutting Argentina's budget deficit, reducing inflation, and making the $640 billion economy more competitive.
I think you have to give the government time. The legacy of the previous government is very pronounced, very complicated.
But not everyone agrees that more time and patience will save Argentina's economy from a total collapse.
All right, let's take a look at some other stories catching our attention this week. It was billed as the biggest IPO ever, but Reuters news agency reported Saudi Arabia's King Salman has put the brakes on the planned public sale of the national oil company. The flotation of 5% of Saudi Aramco was supposed to happen this year, but has now been put off indefinitely. It was a key part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Saudi 2030 economic development plan. But the Reuters report says the king doesn't want to open up the books to regulators. Robert Mogilnicki is a senior analyst at the Sewa Group, a consultancy and advocacy organization. He says Saudi Arabia's economic outlook has changed.
We have to remember back when this IPO was announced, it was early 2016. The economic context was very different than it is now. Saudi Arabia was coming off of a year where their budget deficit reached close to $100 billion. The price of oil was still low. There were a lot of reforms that were on the agenda but had yet to be implemented. And I think we have to remember that that's the context within which the IPO idea came about. Now, after the enthusiasm around that IPO has subsided, we see a very different economic context in Saudi Arabia. The IMF issued a relatively positive consultation that they concluded in July. We saw non-oil growth reaching about 2.3%, a decrease in the year-on-year budget deficit from about 9 to 4.5% expected in 2018. And also the introduction of various other economic measures like the value-added tax and reducing fuel subsidies. So, of course, there's going to be some disappointment from global investors that were very hungry to be part of this IPO. There will certainly be a disappointment from some policymakers within Saudi Arabia that hoped that they could generate approximately $100 billion from this IPO that would then feed into the public investment fund.
Now, one company that is gearing up for an IPO is UK luxury car maker Aston Martin. It wants to list shares on the London Stock Exchange later this year, and it's aiming high with talk of a $6 billion valuation. It also wants to double production from current levels, but achieving that goal could depend on its success in attracting female buyers. James Bond's favorite sports car maker has only ever managed to sell 5% of its cars to women. Our driverless vehicles were in focus this week. Japanese car maker Toyota announced it's investing $500 million in Uber. The idea is that Toyota will provide the cars and Uber the autonomous driving technology. But their future robo-taxi business model has yet to be fully worked out. Big questions over safety remain unresolved after the first pedestrian death involving a self-driving Uber back in March. And a big move in the world of caffeinated drinks. Coca-Cola has snapped up Costa. The US soft drink giant paid more than $5 billion for the world's second largest coffee chain to the UK's Whitbread. The deal will give Coke almost 4,000 coffee outlets in the UK and across Europe. Hot beverages is one of the few areas of the drinks landscape where Coca-Cola does not have a global brand. Our celebrity social media influencers have a new set of online followers. Advertising standards authorities. Online celebrities and vloggers have millions of followers across platforms like Instagram and Facebook. That's why they're called influencers. But many of these stars do not reveal if they have been paid to promote fashion or beauty products or even services like plastic surgery. And that is something authorities in the UK and in the US are starting to examine and prosecute. According to a study by Media Kicks, an influencer marketing agency, 93% of sponsored posts made by the top followed celebrities on Instagram are not disclosed. The fashion industry is one of the biggest sponsors of social media advertising, but many beauty tutorial creators, for example, neglect to mention that they're being paid to promote products. Big brands such as tobacco companies use social media influencers to promote their products. Consumer watchdogs in the US and in the UK say they have started looking more closely at social media marketing practices. And one of the reasons is because influencer marketing has become extremely popular for targeting Generation Z. That is the demographic roughly aged 11 to 18. The message is clear. Social media stars who don't come clean about being paid to promote certain brands could find themselves in court along with their sponsors. Well, joining me now from London is Rupa Shah, an influencer marketing regulatory consultant and founder of #Ad. Thanks very much for being with us. So for the uninitiated among us, just explain to us broadly what exactly is influencer marketing?
Sure. It's at its most simple, it's where a brand will partner with somebody with a large social media following to promote their products. And that might be through just a single sponsored post or through a long-term campaign.
So people like the Kardashians, for example, they would be a good example of influencer marketers.
Yes, they are an example. They're an example of a celebrity, but actually quite a lot of influencer marketing happens with people with much smaller followings. So, for example, 10 to 100,000 followers. They might not be celebrities as we know them. You might not see them on TV, but they will have big, for example, Instagram or Facebook or Twitter followings.
And some of these celebrities are getting a little bit more scrutiny now, aren't they, because of the products that they're pushing and the fact that many people are not aware that a lot of them are being paid to do this. Are we reaching a point now where they are going to get more scrutiny from advertising authorities and so on?
Absolutely, yes. I think it's been described as the Wild West previously, where the average person couldn't actually tell if a post had been sponsored or paid for in some way. So with the advent of investigations from the FTC, the ASA, and now the CMA, it's definitely influencers are much more aware of what they need to be doing, and brands are also a lot more aware of how they need to ensure that posts are clearly disclosed.
Why is this so important? What does this mean to the so-called Generation Z or Generation Z that's coming up now?
Well, it's important because, Generation Z, we are consuming much more social media content than we ever have before. So the market, the market for influencer marketing is growing exponentially, and we're immersed in it. So traditionally, we've always been able to tell the difference between advertising, for example, on TV, and editorial content. There's been a clear distinction between the two. Whereas with social media marketing, sometimes it's very difficult for a consumer to be able to tell what is paid for and what isn't. And it's important for consumers to know this because it will make a difference to their decision as to whether they actually believe that influencer cares about that product. And makes a difference as to whether they actually want to purchase that product. So being very clear as to whether something is an advert and when it isn't is important for consumers throughout the world.
And how big an industry are we talking about here at the moment? I mean, how big is the influencer market in the UK and around the world?
It's huge. So globally, we're talking billions of dollars, and it's growing exponentially. So I think some forecasts are estimating potentially $20 billion by 2020. So it's a massive market, and one in which brands and advertisers are fully aware that there can be some gains, huge gains to be made from using influencer marketing. So it's set to rise, certainly.
And how big a budget do companies themselves allocate for something like this then?
That can really vary. So it can go from anything from very little, some brands still don't use influencer marketing, to up to 40% or 100%. Certainly some products I've seen are actually, the whole premise of that product is to be sold via influencer marketing only, and you will only ever see it marketed on Instagram or Twitter or IGTV, for example, now one of the newest platforms. So it depends on the brand, but if it's a brand that continually markets, most of them will have allocated a budget, certainly by 2020, a large proportion of their budget to influencer marketing.
Rupa Shah, thanks very much for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And finally, biofuels have been touted as a green alternative to fossil fuel, and global demand for biofuels containing palm oil looks set to grow. But behind this green push is a hidden destructive element. Forests in Southeast Asia are being cleared to make way for oil palm plantations. It's also consumed by half the world's population. Florence Louis reports from Kampung Sedul in Sabah State, Malaysia.
Sabah in East Malaysia is renowned for the beauty of its natural landscape. One of its draws is the tropical rainforest, dense undergrowth, tall, majestic trees, rich in plant and animal diversity. It's also a way of life for some, like Juhadin bin Jahamid. For generations, the people from his community in Sedul village have relied on the jungle for much of their needs.
Many things that we use come from the forest. We use rattan to make and build things. Some plants are used in traditional medicine. The insects too are useful. We take honey from the bees. It has medicinal qualities.
Even the water they drink used to come from the forest, but not since the area around it was cleared for development. Juhadin and some villagers fought against the encroachment, but to no avail. Logging in this forest and the landslides that occurred as a result of that have affected this stream. It's a trickle compared to what it used to be, and the water is no longer clear but muddy. Since 2013, much of the forest has been wiped out, the trees replaced by a single crop, oil palm. Sabah is the top palm oil producer in Malaysia, which in turn is the second largest exporter in the world after Indonesia. Demand for the commodity is set to grow, driven in part by the push for biofuel, particularly in China and Indonesia. That could spell a disaster for forests, as land is cleared to make way for plantations. But the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, or RSPO, says alternatives to the commodity may be even worse.
Palm oil has a yield that is 4 to 10 times higher than other oils, so it requires 4 to 10 times less land to make the same amount of oil out of the land that is utilized. So the solution is not to say, let's stop palm oil, let's go to something else, but it's to make sure that whatever we produce is produced sustainably. And that's where the RSPO comes into play.
The RSPO is a voluntary organization, and while it sets standards on palm oil production, it has not committed to zero deforestation. For the people in Sedul village, what they lament is the loss of the forest. They say the land belonged to their ancestors and should be theirs for generations to come.
And that is our show for this week. Remember, you can get in touch with us by tweeting me at Hazem Seeker and use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is our address. And as always, there is more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. So that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Hazem Seeker from the whole team here. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.